Hey, all. Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. This video is made possible by subscriber Kim Hyatt, the great great grandson of George Theodore Hyatt, life dates 1830 to 1900, a veteran of the Union Army and the Civil War. Known as Theodore to friends and family, he's pictured here about July of 1894, soon after he received the Medal of Honor for his gallantry in a brutal assault against the practically impregnable Confederate defenses of Vicksburg on May 22nd, 1863. As you students of the Civil War know, this was the second of two assaults, and the loss here led to the siege that ended with the surrender of Vicksburg and its garrison about 6 weeks later on July 4th, 1863. You students also know that the May 22nd assault was spearheaded by what was called a Forlorn Hope. This was a volunteer storming party to assault breaches and obstacles going in the expected near suicidal odds, heavy casualties, yet survival was always possible with a promised honor or reward. That's the definition of a forlorn hope. One might think a forlorn hope is a suicide mission, but I would suggest they are different. A suicide mission assumes death and lacks a realistic survival plan. A forlorn hope, by comparison, has a high risk but aims at a concrete objective with some chance of survival and, if you do survive, incentives afterward. Thanks to Kim Hyatt, we can see Theodore's face and we can also see his Medal of Honor. Kim explains the original 1862 design ribbon was apparently discarded. Previous medal recipients received a new ribbon and a matching lapel pin by mail and were instructed to replace the old ribbon themselves. Kim adds a note that the rather clumsy and uneven hand stitching visible on the back of the ribbon, that's on the right, that's the image on the right hand side, that's the reverse of the medal. The front of the medal is on the left. The inscription on the reverse reads, "The Congress, the First Sergeant Theodore Hyatt, Company D, 127th Illinois Infantry, for gallantry at Vicksburg, Mississippi." Got to pause here for a minute. What an amazing and what a humbling artifact of our nation's history. There's more. Kim also shared two accounts by Theodore about the May 22nd assault. The first narrative, Kim notes, comes from an autograph book that was discovered in an attic around 2013, not that long ago. It was passed from the finder to a distant Hyatt relative in Delaware via Ancestry.com and then made its way to Kim. The book bears two signatures. One is undated, another from 1918. There's also another date, 1887. It's a sketch of a girl, but otherwise there's no date and there's no ownership information. The origin of this autograph book remains uncertain and unclear. Notably, Theodore does not mention the Medal of Honor in this writing that's in the autograph book. This suggests that it was written before he received it in 1894. Kim kindly provided a transcription of the autograph book writing, and I want to share it with you. Theodore begins with a single sentence that is a timeless life lesson. Here it is. Life is a warfare, and it is a grander heroism to choose and do the right amidst its daily trials than to face death amidst the carnage of the battlefield. Very respectfully, Theodore Hyatt, late First Sergeant, Company D, 127th Illinois Infantry. Then Theodore goes on to tell his Vicksburg story. He writes, "The second assault upon Vicksburg was made May 22nd, 1863. Our regiment, the 127th Illinois, belonged to the 2nd Division of the 15th Army Corps. We were then lying near the wagon road leading to Jackson in the shelter of one of the ravines. On that morning, General Grant called for 150 volunteers from our division, and in the apportionment, 11 were to be supplied by our regiment. Our Company D, having the largest number of men, was required to furnish 2 of these. We were informed as to the character of the service we were expected to undertake, and then came the serious question: who will offer themselves? I was sick, unfit for duty, but it was a time to forget that, and I said, I will go. And 3 others from Company D volunteered, but only one could be accepted until it was known that some of the companies made no offer of volunteers. With these were to be 1 captain, 1 first lieutenant, and 1 second lieutenant. We were ordered to take nothing but a canteen of water and 60 rounds of ammunition for each man. There was a strong fort near the place where the wagon road led through the rebel works. A number of cannons were mounted there, which had complete range of the ground that the 15th Corps was expected to pass over when the assault was made. By using grape and canister shot at such short range, these would be very destructive to our advancing columns. The object of the storming party was to prevent as far as possible the use of these rebel guns while the Corps passed over this exposed ground. We were to gain a lodgment on that fort and await the charge by our entire line of battle, which was to take place within an hour. Where we came upon the road in full view of the rebel fort and lines was, I think, a quarter of a mile distant from the fort. In much less time than one can write it, canister shot and mini balls were sweeping the dust from the road in front of us as a hurricane might do. It seemed impossible for any to escape destruction. The only hope was to reach the fort as quickly as we could and to take our chances at close quarters. The captain and first lieutenant fell, and it was impossible to know how many of the men went down before we reached the fort. The brave second lieutenant, on whom the command devolved, asked me to assist the men in climbing upon the fort. The first one raised his head too high and was instantly killed. The others pressed on, and we were soon all lying there flat down in the hot dust, so that the infantry below could not see us, and the shells from the cannons only a few feet away could pass over our backs. Our reception seems to have changed the order of the movement. The charge that was to have been the signal for us to attack the rebel gunners was directed to some other point, and we were left to our own resources. The rebels not only annoyed us with hand grenades, but killed some of our men. We could hold only our positions through the day when the sun did not hasten to go down. After dark, we crawled quietly out over the ditch and dragged ourselves along the ground only a few feet at a time, for we had first to feel carefully all about us to remove any dry twigs that we might otherwise break and make a noise. Before we were even 50 feet, the fort was covered with Secesh, who kept firing at random after us. It was reported the next day that 47 of us came off without wounds, and I've never seen a correction of that report. Much could be written, but many of the events of that day seem like the remembrance of some terrible nightmare. Respectfully, Theodore Hyatt. Now on to the second account. It was published in the March 21st, 1897 issue of the Sunday Times Herald. It's titled, Nearly All Were Killed. So this is a Chicago newspaper, by the way. Theodore begins. It was the second assault on Vicksburg on May 22nd, 1863, before the Union troops settled down to the siege that won for me my Medal of Honor. I'm going to pause here. There's that reference to the Medal of Honor, different from his first writing. And you'll see he expands more on what he left in the autograph book. So let me continue. I was then an orderly sergeant in Company D, 127th Illinois Infantry, in the 2nd Division of the 15th Army Corps, commanded by General Sherman. Early in the morning, General Grant called for 150 volunteers to form a storming party against a certain portion of the walls. It was so apportioned through the division that 11 of the men were to be supplied by our regiment. When it came to me, I was informed that if we could not get volunteers, I would have to detail men. I replied to the officer that I wouldn't detail any man on such an expedition as was proposed, but that I would volunteer. There were 3 others from my company, and it would have been easy enough to raise the 11 required of our regiment. The 3 others were Manly Small, Robert Atkinson Jr., and Nelson S. Barner. The first 2 are dead, and Barner, I believe, lives somewhere in Michigan. Well, our orders, so far as we subordinates understood them, were to scale the walls at a certain portion of the fort, get a lodgment, and keep the gunners inside from firing at short range and pouring grape and canister into the troops that were to follow us. It was an awful expedition, as we well knew. We were ordered to take 60 rounds of ammunition each and a canteen of water. Somebody asked if we were not to take haversacks. No, replied Frank Blair of St. Louis, who was temporarily in command and who gave us our orders. You can go without your dinners. You'll be inside the walls of Vicksburg or in hell for supper. I detested Blair to that day for his death on that remark, but it served to indicate that the peril of our undertaking. We started about 9:30 o'clock with the understanding that the general charge was to be made within the next hour. We proceeded without trouble or interference toward our destination until we reached Jackson's Road, but there we came squarely into the range of the enemy's guns. For a distance of about 80 rods, there was nothing to protect us. And as we were the only Union troops moving at the time, we got all the fire. From the moment we entered Jackson's Road, it was swept by a perfect hurricane of shot and shell. There was a constant whiz of bullets, and it didn't seem as if a man of us could reach that fort without being shot full of holes. And not many of us did. The report issued the next morning was that 47 of the 150 who had volunteered for the expedition were safe and sound. The other 103 were either killed or wounded. I saw comrades dropping all around me in Jackson's Road, and although I was not wounded, several bullets passed through my clothing. I carried a musket for one of my comrades in order that he might carry an 8-inch plank to enable us to cross the ditch in front of the front walls. The plank was pierced by 22 bullets. It didn't seem that a man could hold up a finger without having it shot off. So thick the balls were flying. How any of us reached that fort, I can't tell. But some of us did. When we got there, the lieutenant in command asked me to give the others a lift to enable them to get on the walls. The first man I lifted went up too high. He was shot through the brain the instant he showed his head above the walls and fell back dead in my arms. The rest, though, went up more cautiously, and inside of 15 minutes, we were all on top and had planted our flag. It was an awful position, though, for the rebel cannon were firing directly over us into our troops beyond. We had to lie flat on our stomachs to keep from being killed. A few men were careless enough to raise their heads and were shot to pieces in no time. Shot and shell went screeching over us, carrying death into our ranks behind. But we were safe as long as we kept down flat. That is, we were safe from rebel bullets and from everything else until they began to toss hand grenades on the wall. The first one of those that came blew the head of the second man from me clean off his shoulders. They did a good deal of destruction among us till we learned to knock them back with the butts of our guns, and then they exploded inside the fort. Well, we stayed there sprawled out on top of that wall from the time we reached there in the morning till darkness fell at night. For some reason or other, the charge was to have been followed after we have been gone on the walls, and that charge was not made. The plans were changed, but of course, we had no communication with our troops and knew nothing of it. No one came to relieve us, and no one ordered us away. We couldn't have left before darkness anyway, and all we could do was to lie there flat on our stomachs with rebel shot and shell whistling and rushing not more than 15 inches above us and carrying death to our comrades beyond. It may seem strange, but it is a fact nevertheless that under those awful circumstances, one of the things we had to battle against was sleepiness. It was all we could do to keep some of the men awake in spite of the peril of the situation. But it isn't so strange after all. Added to the fatigue and excitement of getting there, we were forced to lie flat and see nothing but black dirt below or the sky above. The shells that swept over us blew terrific blasts of wind in our faces, and the awful concussion of the guns was deafening. It took lots of pinching and thumping to keep some of the men awake, but we were determined that none of us would be taken prisoners, sleeping or alive. Along toward night, when the firing ceased, a little from the fort, there was a little conversation between us and the rebels inside. One fellow shouted up that if we didn't get off the wall, he would send up a detachment and gut every last one of us. A little Missourian who carried our flag answered for us. "I'd like to see you try coming up here," he said. "We've got 20,000 men on these walls." But they didn't come up then. They couldn't without exposing themselves to the guns of our batteries. They came up after dark, though, but when they got there, we had gone. We had gathered up our wounded as fast as we could while it was growing dark, dropped to the ground outside the walls, and crawled away. The rebels followed us with bullets wherever they heard a noise, and in that way may have killed some of our number. It was impossible to tell, though, about that. All that I knew was that the first the captain and then the first lieutenant who led the charge were shot down, with most of the men in Jackson's Road. The command devolved upon the second lieutenant. He lived through the day to be shot down later at Kennesaw Mountain. I didn't know the names of any of them, as I had never met them before that day. Our little storming expedition didn't accomplish anything, but that was not our fault. We sent where we were told to go, and if the charge had been made as we expected, we would have dropped inside the walls and closed with the enemy gunners. If we had, probably not a man of us would have come out alive, but we would have gone just the same. While we were lying on the walls in the afternoon, General Mower's brigade tried to make up assault on Jackson's Road, through which we had passed. The fire that greeted them repulsed them in a minute. It was the same for us when we came up, yet not a man in our party turned back. Signed, Theodore Hyatt. So thanks to listening to the story of the 127th Illinois Infantry at Vicksburg on May 22nd, as told by Theodore Hyatt, and many thanks to Kim Hyatt for making this reading possible. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.